What we're going to be going over here is an example using our activity-based costing method, or ABC costing. So the first thing we have to do when we're talking about this ABC costing system, we have to set up our system, and this is really how we allocate our overhead here between our products. And for our example, we're only going to be looking at two different products. Product A here, which is going to make $900,000 per year here, product A, and product B, we're going to make $2.1 million of product B here. So looking at our ABC costing setup, a system setup here, first you have to identify the activities here, and what we're talking about, the activities, those are those overhead activities or those indirect cost activities, and that's really the work or function that's being provided here as an indirect cost here, and we're going to be looking at it for these two different products here. And then you have to determine the cost drivers, really what is the reason why you're performing those activities. So that's going to be your cost driver here, and then you're going to have to set up your activity cost pools, which we'll look at, and then we have to determine the cost measure or the indirect cost rate here that we have for this activity here. So when you're dealing with these cost pools or these activity cost pools that we're going to set up here, they can either be set up as a unit level, or it can be any one of these 5 different levels here: unit level, batch level, product level costing, or the facility level here, or the customer level. And that's how you allocate your costs here on these cost pools. But we're just be looking at an example here where we're going to be looking at the batch level costing here. Okay, so the first thing we have to do is look at our first stage allocation of these activities, or these this worker function that's being provided in terms of the monies here that are costs that are being provided. So what we're going to do here is we're going to be looking, first we have to set up our activity cost pool, and then we have to know what our cost driver is, what the need for that activity is here, and it's sort of a common sense approach that you'd be using. So for these activity cost pools, we're looking at the total cost of the resource that's provided for each of our different activity costs. So what we're going to do here for our activity cost pool, first we have to determine our total indirect costs here. I've got that shown here as number 1. And then we would divide that to our total indirect costs here by the total number, quantity of whatever activity we're looking at here. That would be our number 2 item. And what we mean by that, it either can be based on some frequency, some duration, or some physical measure or so forth. So we have to know what our quantity of our cost allocation base is here. And then thirdly here, dividing our total indirect costs here for our particular activity cost pool by the total quantity of that activity we're performing is going to give us our indirect cost rate, or our cost driver unit cost. Okay, so again, we're going to be looking at it based on just 1 year's production here. And let's just go into our example here. So for our different activity cost pools, and we're just going to be looking at these two different products, product A and product B, that we'd be looking at here. And we've got really 5 different cost pools that we set up as our overhead costs here for this example, and we determine those activity cost pools here, and that's really our total indirect cost based on 1 year's indirect cost for these products. So we've done it here, and I'm just looking at it in terms of batch level costing. So the different cost pools that we're looking at, we're going to be looking at our purchase orders here that we allocate between our different products here, and then also our machine setups here, our product packaging, and our testing and inspection, and also some maintenance or cleaning. So we've got 5 different cost pools that we're allocating here for this example here, and for our different activity cost pools for our total indirect costs that we're looking at. In this example, it's really based on a manufacturing production between these two different products here. So first thing we have to do, looking at our first cost pool here, we take it's our purchase orders, and it's not the purchase order value that we issue. This is the cost of generating those purchase orders, and for this year we're saying there's $180,000 here in generating purchase orders, and let's just say there's a quantity of 100 purchase orders based on these batches that we're talking about. So $180,000 worth of cost here for our cost of generating these purchase orders, divided by 100 purchase orders here. That's our activity base here that we're looking at, is going to give us $1,800 here for per purchase order that we're going to have to allocate between products A and product B here. And then our machine setups, we're just saying our total setups here, indirect cost, not any direct costs here. Indirect costs are sitting at $375,000 here for the year, and we're saying there's 250 machine setups that we have for the two products here. So that division, 375 divided by 250, is going to give us $1,500 here per machine setup here that we have to allocate. And then for product packaging, we're saying indirect costs, $280,000 here, and we're saying that in this case it's going to be $1,400,000, and this is really a unit cost here that we're looking at, because these are the total number of units that we're looking at here for these two products. Now the first two here were really based on batch allocate, the batch level of batch allocation here, whereas this is really a unit per unit allocation. So 250,000 or 280,000 here for our packaging indirects divided by 1.4 million here. So units that we're looking at here, allocating it over. So that's 20 cents a piece here on a unit basis. And then our testing and inspection, that would be again on some batch level here. And we're saying that our overhead costs are sitting at 300,000 here, and we have a quantity of 3,000 different testing and inspections as our allocation base here. So that's going to give us the division here, 300,000 divided by 3,000 gives us $100 here per testing and inspection setup. And then we're going to have this last cost pool here for maintenance and cleaning. Again, we're looking at $287,500 for the year here, and we're going to say we have 250, a quantity of 250 of those, or 250 times we have to perform that function. So that division, 287,500 divided by 200 quantity of 250 gives us a maintenance and cleaning on per operation or per batch here, as you want to call it, $1,150. Okay, so we have our total overhead here. It's going to be, add everything up here, it's going to be $1,413,500 that we're allocating over these 5 different cost pools here. So just starting with our first one here for our purchase orders for product A, we're saying of the 100 quantity of purchase orders that we have to produce here, or process here, product A is going to get 75 of those, or 75%. So $1,800 here per order times 75 is going to give us a total cost here of $135,000. And we're making a quantity of product A here is 900,000 that we're looking at. So that's going to give us a unit cost here of 15 cents a piece here for allocating our purchase order cost here for product A. Now product B, they get the remainder here. Of the 100 we're looking at, product B gets 25 of the remaining 25 here is being allocated for producing product B. And again, that would be based on a 25% allocation base if you want to look at it that way. So our total for product B, again, 25 units here of the $1,800 per purchase for processing it here gives us $45,000 worth here for allocated to product B. And we have a quantity here of B of 2.1 million here. So its unit cost here for those purchase orders is going to be 2 cents a piece. So then moving to our machine setups here, go through the same thing. We don't have to go through all these numbers here. For product A, we're going to say of the 250 here, the machine setups, product A gets 150. 150 times the $1,500 per setup here is 225,000 divided by, again, the quantity here, 900,000 gives us, on a per unit basis here, of 25 cents. Product B is going to get, of the 250, they're going to get the remaining 100 machine setups here. Again, that's 40%, whereas product A here was 60%. So 100 times 100 setups here times $1,500 per setup. Indirect cost is going to give us 150,000 divided by the 2.1 million, so we get 7 cents a piece here for product B here per machine setup, per unit cost. Everything was based on a per unit cost, based on the quantity here that we're producing on a unit basis. And for units here for A, if I didn't go through it, was 25 cents per unit here. 225,000 divided by 900,000. And then for product packaging, the same thing. Just take the, in this case, we're allocating 900,000 of it is going into product A here. again, and we had that at 20 cents a piece. So that's 180,000 divided again by the 900,000 here for product A, the units we're processing. Again, this is on a unit basis, so 20 cents here per unit for our product packaging. Again, those are indirect costs. And then for product B here, we're going to say of this 1.4 million or 1.4 million, they're going to get 500,000 of that. So and that's 36%. 900,000 here was 64% if you want to look at it at that basis. So for product B, we're looking at 500,000 times 20 cents a piece. So that gives us 100,000 here allocated to product B. Again, divided by 2.1 million here is giving us, on a unit basis for product B, is 5 cents. And then going to our testing and inspection, again, same process. We go the 1,000 here is being of the 3,000 inspections or testing and inspection quantity that we're looking at, or our allocation here. Product A is getting 1,000 or 33% of those here times $100 each is going to give us 100,000 divided again by its quantity here, or quantity of A at 900,000 into the 100,000 here that's allocated, gives us on a unit basis 11 cents a piece. And then for our product B here, they get what, 2,000 of the testing and inspections here, or 66%, again times $100 each. That gives us 200,000 again divided by its unit here of 2.1 million here units. So that's 9 cents a piece here for product B. And then for our last operation or cost pool here, activity pool, our maintenance and cleaning, 200. We have 200 here is being allocated for product A times again 200 of the quantity here of those activities that we're doing. 200 of those of the 250 is going into product A times $1,150 each gives us 230,000 divided by 900,000 units here. A quantity of product A gives us 26 cents a piece here. And then for product B, it's just the remaining here. We got 50 of the maintenance and cleaning, the quantity or the quantity or batches that we're looking at. 50 is allocated here for product B times 1,150 is 57,500. Again, divided by 2.1 million here for product B here, you're coming up with 3 cents a piece. So our total overhead based on this activity-based costing, where we look through these activity 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 here. Our total activities, if you sum everything up here for product A, we're allocated our total overhead here $870,000. And if you look at the unit costs here for on a per basis for unit A, that's 97 cents here. And remember, these are all our indirect costs here. And then for product B, if you total up your total allocation here for product B, those 5 different cost pools, you're going to get 552,500 here for product B. And if you look at it on a unit basis, you go up each of the unit, or for each of the activities on a per unit basis, you're going to get a total allocation here on a per unit basis of 26 cents. So this is all those indirect costs that we were looking at, and we divided up all those indirect costs here for the year over those 5 different cost pools that we're looking at. And then one other thing here before we go on with our calculations, just to make a point here, those are what we've done here is only for those total indirect costs that we're looking at. And we went through the example here for a manufacturing operation, and all those indirect costs we trace to really some manufacturing operation, except for the purchase orders, which have been by the purchasing department. But we also have to, for our total costs, we'd have to add in our direct materials, our direct labor, and any other direct costs here that we'd have to add to our total indirect costs. Okay, so we'll just go and we'll sum up this by just going through our numbers here to sum up our example. Okay, now to go over this problem that we just worked through on our activity-based costing and looking, you can look at the table here, and we have it broken down between product A and product B, and then the total amounts for each. So we would have, our total number of units that we produced here for product A was those 900,000. Product B was 2.1 million here for a total number of units, 3 million units. And then I have the direct labor shown here, and our direct materials shown over here. So then we add your total direct labor and materials for each of your products, product A and product B, So you get your total direct costs, as we know, looking at for each product, and then the total amount here we have in our total direct costs. So you can go through those numbers. Now our overhead costs, that's what was based on our activity-based costing here for product A. Our total overhead costs that we allocated here with those 5 different activities was $870,000, and for product B was $552,500. So our total overhead cost was sitting at $1,422,500. And then we have some revenues per unit here. You can look at those, and that's on a per unit basis. That's really the selling price here. And then our direct costs on a per unit basis here, you got to figure that out here. That was our total direct cost here, line 2 here, divided by the units produced here in line 1 here for both product A and product B. So our total direct costs, we come up here, you can look at those numbers, and then our overhead costs on a per unit basis was what? Our total overhead cost here for each of their products here divided by the units produced here. So our overhead costs on a per unit basis here, and for product A it was 97 cents per unit, and for product B 26 cents per unit, and that's what we calculated going through that activity costing earlier. And then our gross profit per unit here, well, that's taking our revenue per unit here, and then we'd have to subtract out our direct cost per unit and our overhead per unit here. So you're going to get a gross profit per unit here. And then a gross profit as a profit margin or as a percentage here, that's just taking the gross profit per unit here divided by the revenue per unit here to see what that is. So that, in this case, for product A, it was 26%, product B, 37%. Okay, so that is what our costing would be for activity-based costing. Now let's go and let's compare it to our traditional costing, where you really have one allocation base here, and it was all those overheads would be based on direct labor dollars here, or direct labor hours, however you want to look at it. So again, for our indirect cost allocation based on our direct labor alone here, and you would use the same overhead for same overhead dollar amount here would be used for both the traditional costing here using our just direct labor here and that ABC or activity-based costing. So our indirect cost as a percentage of direct labor here, so our indirect overhead, remember we calculated that to be $1,422,500. Our direct labor, our total direct labor cost, if you go back and look at it, is $1,500,000. So as our indirect cost as a percentage of direct labor, division gives us 94.8%. So looking at our traditional costing using this direct labor as our overhead allocation here, we just remember we have that only direct labor alone is used here. We don't use those 5 different costing pools that we looked at as we did in ABC costing. So just going and looking at, not going through all the numbers here for product A and product B, what you want to look at is our overhead cost allocation here, and that's based on our direct labor. For product A, we had $450,000 here in direct labor times that 94.8% here. So that our indirect cost here is 94.8% of our direct labor cost here. So our overhead cost in that case is $426,600, and then for product B, again 94%. In this case, the direct labor here for product B was $1,050,000 here. 94.8% of that is going to give us our overhead cost, or those indirect cost allocation, $995,400. So the total amount here is $1,422,500. So this is using that traditional costing. See, it's the same. We're working with the same amount of overhead here for both the ABC and this on our traditional costing here, ABC costing and traditional costing. We have the same amount here. So if we look at it based on our activity-based overhead cost, we would have had, based on our activity base, you can see the distinct difference here for product A. Instead of $426,600 that we have here based on direct labor alone, we now have $870,000. Now that's what we would have calculated here for activity-based costing. And then for product B, our overhead cost for activity-based costing is less here, $552,500 versus what we allocated here based on a direct labor alone, $995,400. But you can see here, overhead for activity-based and our overhead cost here based on our direct labor allocation is the same here, just to make a point here. And the reason we're going through that here is just to see the difference here. And the activity base is really a better or a truer tracing here of the overhead costs, because you can trace it back and to the product and exactly allocate all those overhead costs in a trace them in a better allocation management versus just using that direct labor here. So just moving on here, our direct labor cost on a per unit basis, you can go through those 2 here divided by 1 here. And then overhead costs on a per unit basis, that's 3 here, line 3, that's our overhead cost here for each of the products here divided by the units of production here. And for this direct labor costing, we're going to get direct labor on a overhead here on a per unit basis, 47 cents for each of them. If you go through your divisions here in your calculations, compared to the activity based, our overhead, remember when we use those 5 different allocation pools or cost allocation pools, we come up with 97 cents here for A here for overhead allocation versus product A here for the direct labor allocation. So you can see the difference here, 47 cents here versus 97 cents here on a per unit basis for our activity base. And big difference here. And then for our product B, it was 47 cents here on a per unit basis, overhead allocation versus 26 cents. So you can see the big difference here. Activity based should be a more accurate costing here based on this allocation of the overhead. And then for gross profit per unit, you can see that was our revenue per unit minus our direct cost per unit minus our overhead cost per unit here, 4 minus 5 minus 6. So our gross profit per unit for product A, $1.28, and product B here, 53 cents. And you can see it based on our activity base, our gross profit per unit would have been 78 cents. So you can see here, we're way off here for our direct labor here. We're saying we're making a whole lot more money here for product A here than we actually are here when we look at our activity-based costing. And same for product B here, 53 cents here, gross profit per unit for product B versus 74 cents. Here we're actually making more here using our activity-based costing, which is supposed to be a more accurate costing. And then if you just look at your gross profit percentage, making the comparison here, 7 divided by 4, your unit gross profit per unit divided by the revenues per unit. Gross profit here for product A here, 42% profit margin as a percentage here versus our activity-based costing, 26%. So our activity-based is supposed to be a better, or trace it more accurate trace here, so you can see we're actually using the direct labor basis here. We're saying we're making a whole lot more gross profit than we actually are here using our activity base. And then for product B here, same, just the opposite is true. We're saying our gross profit margin of 26.5 here, and that's for, again, based on our direct labor alone here, versus 37% here activity base. So we're saying for product B here, we're actually making more here using our activity base, which is a more accurate tracing of our in this case, the gross profit margin here. We're saying with a product B, we're saying we're making less here. So you can see, just trace it up and down the lines here. When you're making a comparison here between your, just looking at the single base here for direct labor alone here versus our activity-based costing where we use those 5 different cost pools. And this was just to go through the example to see how you would make the comparison here. And activity-based costing should give you a much better cost, a more accurate cost. So you can actually determine your, in this case, you want to get down to what your gross profit margin is. So you can, in this case, you can see we're making up, using our activity base here costing, we realize we're not making the gross margin that we are here versus on our direct labor alone. So activity base is saying we're making a whole lot less here for product A, and for product B, we're making a whole lot more here with activity based versus our standard costing. So that's what we're ultimately trying to get to here when we're talking activity-based costing versus just looking at this lone basis here on direct labor alone here for making our costing estimates and our analysis. Okay, so that'll end our discussion.